Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, we are going to create such a use case that I'm presenting over here, which is just simple vehicle registration, approved, and purchase related things. And I'm just going to do the register vehicle in this video, and we'll create an end-to-end API and test out that. And after this, what I'm going to do is like I'm going to create a front end to demonstrate how to integrate this UI. So first, I'll have to create a constants file so that sorry, before constants we have to create a utility class that will be separating the hashing function out of the main code. Okay, so this hashing function, once we separate, can be replaced or updated with any other method to hash the address. Okay, so the address is just when you pass an id, we will hash it, and we'll create a 64 character string out of it, and we'll append it to the family address. Okay, so that data will come under that family address. Okay, so this method can be changed to anything we want to return a unique 64 character for a given id. Okay, and once that is done, for this action type I need to create constants. So the constants are going to be the register vehicle, approve vehicle, reject, all those things. Okay, so instead of referring to literals, I'm going to use constants in this part. Okay, you guys also have to use constants wherever possible. Okay, I'm allowed. And this family details we are going to mention here, this could be coming from a environment variable. Okay, when you deploy the backend separately, but here we are using the code base like shared between the contract and the API, so I'm putting it over here. And the namespace is going to be the Winsel, and we have to create a six character length namespace for this, and the version is just 1.0 string. Okay, so our constant file is now ready. The next thing is to create a copy of the handler, and like use as much as code we can do. Okay, so I'm gonna refer to this code, and we'll copy the reusable part from the old handler. Okay, so we can reuse the class constructor and apply method that is implemented from there, and this will be exported. Okay, so the name that we are going to use, WinCell handler. Okay, it's the same name we have to export also. After that, we'll be updating the family namespace and family version, all those details from the constants that we have created earlier. Okay, so I'm going to use the version, namespace, all those things in the constructor. Also, I'll be updating the values over in the test.js that we will be later importing into a service class. Then we'll be importing the newly created class over in the registration. Okay, so once this is done, our contract will be registered as Pincel 1.0, as you can see in the log. Since when we start writing the code, first thing we have to do is like we have to decode the payload. The decode usually comes in a buffer format. Okay, based on what library you have used to encode, you will be decoding it. So here I've just used the string encoding, just like stringified the JSON payload, okay, for its simple understanding. So the method I'm going to use, just using payload equal to JSON parse, okay, so which will decode this payload, okay. So when we are transmitting the data, it will be sent as buffer, and when we receive it in the transaction process request, it will be a string, okay. So this is done, and the next thing that we have to do is like we need to prepare a payload. Okay, so that we'll be testing right now. Since we are expecting a JSON type, okay, so this JSON type will include a ID, action, and any other payload that we need. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So earlier we have created an action constant file, so actions in the constant file that I'll be importing over here in the register.vehicle. Okay, that same thing that we are going to validate in the switch case. Okay, so this is just normal JavaScript coding. Okay, you can see, freely skip this coding part or write logics as per your need. Okay, so there is no payload given, so this is the important part. We need to validate all the input parameters as what we expect. Okay, else the contract might act weird and it's hard to debug once you go production. Okay, so if there is no action we are throwing in a transaction and case, that is a register vehicle that we are trying to implement right now. We'll be doing all the actions that will be needed. Okay, so by default, if there is no supported action type given in the payload, we'll say it's not a supported transaction. Okay, so once that is done, I'm gonna need to copy this set state method. Okay, so in the set state method, we are going to update the family namespace that is going to be the wincells one, and the hash function from the reusable utilities library. Okay, and since we are expecting id, I'm gonna put it like id. Okay, since in the real case will also be validating the id is present or not. And once that is done, I'm just gonna create an address based on the id and set a value as id only. Okay, so that we can easily understand what's the value that is getting stored in the state. Okay, so now I'm gonna update the payload to be from the JSON stringified object. Okay, when we submit this transaction, as you can see, the state is getting updated, and the block got committed. The next thing that we need to do is like validate if the ID is already taken. Okay, so this is a registered vehicle and we need to validate. So I'm going to use the get state from the context. Okay, in the context we'll have get state, set state, and delete state. Okay, so that can be used in different scenarios. So in the get state, what you will be receiving is like, since I'm passing address in a parameter like array. Okay, so the response I'll be getting is an object which might have more than one address. Okay, so based on how many addresses you are passing, that many object items will be there. So inside the object item, the value will be in buffer format. So I'm checking take the value, check the length of the buffer. Okay, the buffer is not equal to 0, means that the value space is already taken. I'm saying like, so there's a power form with this id, and I'm not going to register this. Okay, so now if we test this application again, so like, okay, so we need to make this a asynchronous function. As you can see, we can make it as a asynchronous. Okay, finally it is expecting only a promise. Okay, we submit the transaction, and you can see there is like a lot of error logs, because when there is a issue, okay, with the in the dev engine only. Okay, and until a successful transaction is submitted, this error will be keep on throwing. I'll check what is the error. Okay, maybe the id. We'll try the transaction again. Okay, so the error log got stopped. Okay, and the value got updated. Okay, unless there is a successful transaction, the error log will keep on happening in the dev engine mode. Okay, and now we'll create some more real Madrid 1 2 3. Okay, so some more cars, and every car is getting registered successfully as expected. So this is where I'm going to commit that this is like contract is now working. Okay, so register vehicle is now working. So the next thing that we have to do is like we have a tested.js file, right? This test.js, we need to make it a bit reusable so that we could call other contract methods that we might implement in the future. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to create a transaction controller that will be receiving the request and response, like sending the response back. So for this transition vehicle, I'm going to use the test.js, like the complete test.js code, okay, and make it so that it can accept a payload and send transaction to the contract. Okay, so we are going to refactor this code a bit. We are expecting a private key from the parameter only. Okay, and when we have a public key, we will try to get the like a private key from the database. Okay, so the expected parameter is going to be public key, and when we receive a public key, we'll take the private key from the database, and using the private key, we'll create a signer and sign the transaction and send it. Okay, so this function we are going to call send transaction will receive the payload that we have written from line number 12 to 16. This will be our input, okay, from the other functions. So we'll check if that is a string that is given, else we will stringify the method and create a payload byte out of it. Okay, and these functions that we have should be moved into the function that just we create, like we just created. We don't need the error handler, and this will be the return type for this function. Okay, so once that is written, we'll be using that same logic over in the register vehicle. controller. Okay, so over here we are expecting ID from the params. This can be coming from anywhere, body or query. Okay, so that payload will contain an ID and owner for public key. So, okay, which will be used in the later stages where we will be identifying the vehicle owner by public key. Okay, who is signing the transaction, and finally we'll have the action type. So after that, we'll be calling the send transaction function that we have created just now, and we'll be sending the payload, handle the response, send the response, what's the response to the client. So all those things will be done over here. Once the controller is written, we'll be importing and registering a router out over here, and in this router, we'll be resolving a public key. Okay, so that we need to pass over here. So when we send a transaction, this signer public key will be coming from the signed in user details. Okay, once we replace all the signer public key hex method derivation to just a string value that from the parameter, we'll have to figure out whether this user has the private key or not using this simple find query to the MongoDB. Okay, so where we'll be passing the public key that we are receiving the parameter and try to identify the user exists or not. Okay, so once the user is there and we get the user's private key, we'll create a signer out of that and we'll sign the header bytes and batch bytes, so batch using that. Once that is done, I think we all set to use dynamic credentials to sign transactions over here in the backend side. We also will need to make this middleware go somewhere else. Okay, so that this middleware could be applied for multiple endpoints instead of current uh, test endpoint. Okay, so we'll create a middleware.js file. We'll import this particular request response from there. We'll also import all the required keys for this particular middleware. Okay, so once that is done, we'll apply the middleware to API slash. Okay, and over here vehicle ID will be with the registered one. When we hit the endpoint, you can see the error log that the user is not exist because I just missed sending the user public key over here, and yeah, so the batch public key needs to be set. There we made a mistake over here in the code. We only set the signer public key, so the signer public key also needs to be set for the batch public key. And okay, so we are having an issue with sending the response back to the browser or the postman. It probably got caused by not this, but we'll anyway remove this because we are anyway only sending object for now. We don't need to validate that. Still the error exists, and this is probably in the response here. So uh, what we are getting over here is the function. Okay, when we try to send a function and then the response JSON, it returns the circular error, and when we send data, it actually returns the data that we receive from the API submission. And for this transaction, we have tried twice, and this bin number is already taken, and the error logic is working, and transaction gets kept on trying until we submit a like correct transaction. Okay, so this is a known bug in the dev engine. We changed the ID, we submitted, and it got registered. It should be, yeah, it's registered. Okay, so this is for this class, and in the next video, what we are going to do is like we'll have a front end that will contact our backend and submit a transaction, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.